I mean, when we were in school and the sirens went off, so that was it. We had to go straight across to the shelters. But when we were at home, the sirens would go off usually if the planes were about, the enemy planes were about. Usually when it was dark in the winter time, particularly in the winter time, they'd go off about 6, 7 o'clock. And we had at home, we had an Anderson shelter, which was a sort of metal shelter which was half buried in the back garden, and you had to go down steps to go into it. My dad had dug this great hole in the back garden and put this big shelter down there, and we used to have to go down there. And because a lot of the air raids lasted all night, we would sleep down there. We would go down and sleep, and my mother would put me down to sleep down there, and then she would come down later. My father was in the Home Guard, so he was in a reserved occupation. He was a mechanical engineer, and he was in a reserved occupation out at the Bristol Aeroplane Works. So he didn't actually go away to war, but he was in the Home Guard, and he used to go to the Home Guard most evenings of the week. And the Home Guard was up on the headquarters of the Home Guard, where he had to report, was up on Horfield Common, where Tesco is now. And that's where he used to go off with someone from down the road, but 2 men from down the road used to go as well. The 3 of them would go off up the road together up to the headquarters there. And my mum didn't like being down in the shelter at night with just me. I think she felt very vulnerable. So there was a daughter of the person living next door, and she would have been about her mid-20s then. And she used to come across and sleep in our shelter as well, so that my mother wouldn't be on her own. And in the morning, about 7:30 every morning, her mother would come down the garden with a tray of teacups. Her mother had been a parlour maid before she married, and she'd come down with a tray of tea, immaculately laid with a little tray cloth on and the cups and saucers, keeping up the standards, 7:30 in the morning. And I remember that quite clearly, having this cup of tea handed us through the shelter door. We did have a few bombs in the area, not many, because of course if the planes came over this way, they would either want to bomb the centre of the city, or the docks, or else the docks at Avonmouth, or else at Filton. They made a lot of attacks on the Filton Aeroplane Works, and there was one dreadful raid out there, one lunchtime in daylight, and it was a dreadful raid out at Filton, and I think about 300 people were killed out there. And I didn't realise until years afterwards that my father must have been out there at that time, because that's where he worked, and that he must have been out there at that time, but he never spoke of it. He never spoke of his war at all. He might have said 1 or 2 things about the Home Guard, but he never actually spoke of his war. But as I say, we go back, so we did have a couple of bombs here. We had one up in the rectory field, actually. It avoided, there's houses all around the rectory field, but the bomb went right in the middle. Well, I think the houses probably had their windows blown out, with the blast, but they weren't actually bombed. There was one in 1 or 2 in Wellington Hill West, I think, bombs came down. Oh, and in Western Crescent, which is near the church, there was a house there that was bombed. But I think where we actually lived was sort of between the 2 places, and perhaps they just shoved the bomb, if the planes were going back, they just shoved any extra bombs out where they had them. I don't think they made for this area at all.
How did the Second World War affect the local community in Horfield?
Well, of course, I was a child then. We had a shelter built, a corporation shelter built down the bottom of Churchways Crescent, to the road, the bottom there. They had these various shelters actually built in the roadway, sort of on the road. I mean, cars could obviously get past, but they would build them on the edge of the road around, so that people could go in the shelters. And of course, there was no windows or anything in them, because they just had to be sort of solid, thick brick. I remember those shelters about. They had. My mother joined the WVS, that was the Women's Voluntary Service, and they used to go down somewhere in St Paul's, I can't remember where. It's a big factory in St Paul's where they used to weave camouflage nets, for putting over guns and whatever. And they used to weave them down there, and the WVS used to go down. When it was school holidays, I used to go down with her, and I quite liked doing that, helping weave these great nets. As I said, I always liked needlework or anything like that, and I used to weave these big nets. I remember that, and of course, the thing that it affected my mother much more than me was the food rationing, because the food rationing, it was very. It was very scarce, the food, and you got about 2 ounces of butter per person per week and things like that. I mean, it was quite drastic, and my mother obviously had to sort the food out for the family, and you had to register with certain suppliers to get food. And we, being near the Gloucester Road, we registered at a little grocer's shop on the corner of Gloucester Road, and corner of Gloucester Road and Pitt Road. I think it's gone now. I'm sure it must have gone now. But I remember going down there and getting the rations and that for my mother and doing bits of shopping. And because all the food and that you bought, anything that was on ration, like vegetables weren't on ration, but there were tremendous queues in the shops, and you just had to join the queue until you got your turn to be served. And if you got to, by the time you got to the head of the queue, perhaps all the potatoes would have been gone, because that was in short supply. And they would sort of, the shopkeeper then would ration out sometimes. You can only have one small cabbage or something like that, because food was so short. And I think I remember fish was off ration, and there used to be a wet fish shop down there in one of our local shops, and my mother used to queue for that and buy that sometimes. And I hated fish, and I don't like fish now very much at all. And I hated fish, and I remember the battles over lunchtime when my mother would put a piece of fish in front of me and I didn't want to eat it. And she didn't have anything else. I remember that. And I still don't like fish very much now, so yeah. But I was thinking of my sort of home life. Apart from sleeping in the shelter, because you slept in the shelter at night, you didn't sleep very well, because you slept in the shelter all night, which was a bit uncomfortable. I mean, you slept on the actual floor. There were sort of mattresses put on the actual floor, and you slept on the floor. I can't see. Being a child, I mean, it didn't affect me all that much at all. It just didn't take things in. I don't know what was going on.
Going back to the common more generally, when you were young, what kind of games did you play growing up, and how many of them were focused around the common?
Well, not very many. I wasn't allowed out to play. I could play in the house. I could have someone in to play in the house, so I could play in the garden. But I think my mother liked to keep an eye on me. So I didn't actually play on the common, and there weren't any of those children's playing fields like there are up there now. Nothing like that. It was just grass, and I wasn't allowed to go on the common. I used to have a friend who lived in Church Road. So we lived in Church Road Crescent, and I had a friend who lived in Church Road, and I used to go and play with her, and she used to come back and play with me sometimes. But I can't really remember what we used to play. I don't remember that very much at all. And we parted company. When we got to 11, she went to a different school to me, so I didn't sort of see much of her after that. And there were a couple of other, come to think, there were a couple of other children in the road, but we sort of played in one another's houses more than out in the street or out in the road. And out, I'd say the common, my mother wouldn't let me go there. I think it was a bit too far away. She couldn't keep tabs on me.
What was the community like in Horfield when you were young? Did you know your neighbours very well?
We got to know them during the war. They were very, as I say, it was 36, 1936 when we moved there, so it was a few years before the war started, about 3 years. And the neighbours kept themselves very much to themselves. And then once the war came, things got a lot more friendly. And as I say, my neighbour's daughter used to come in and sleep with my mother and things like that. They got much more friendly. And I think they used to sort of keep an eye out for one another. And the neighbour 2 or 3 doors up, her husband went off in the RAF, and she had a sort of small baby and a toddler. And my dad used to do things for her and keep an eye on, and we'd look after the baby and the toddler or something sometimes. And we got very friendly with them, actually. And there's I think that generally the neighbours got much more friendly and more community orientated during the war. It was during the war that did that. That was the good side that it brought out. I've got a photograph somewhere. I'm trying to think where it is now. It's of after the war, when the war finished. It was the celebration tea party in the road. I got a photo of it, so I'll try and find it later. And
that's okay. What did central Bristol mean to you? Did you visit it very much, or were you largely around?
No, we didn't go down to the centre very much, because I would be not until sort of later years, until I was a teenager. We used to go down to the centre of the city when I was a teenager. But when I was living sort of younger then, I mean, we had plenty of shops, as you've got today. We've got plenty of shops on the Gloucester Road. And we used to go down, to walk down Gloucester Road or walk so far and walk back again. Or a bit later on, a bit older, I was about 11 or 12, we'd get the bus to Zetland Road. And there was a big store on the corner there. First of all, it was Morgan's, then it changed to Colmer's, and I'm not sure what it is now. I don't think it's it. But that was a big store right on the corner of Zetland Road, a huge store. And we used to get the bus down as far as there, have a good poke round Colmer's, and go and have a cup of tea in their cafe, and then walk home. And walk home looking in all the shops. I mean, we had sort of everything we wanted. And during the war, the centre of the city was bombed very badly, and the shops that had been in the centre moved out. A lot of them moved up to Gloucester Road. A lot moved to Gloucester Road, and a lot moved to East Street in Bedminster. So we had all the shops that we needed. We had clothes shops, shoe shops, as well as grocers' shops and cafes and things on Gloucester Road. So we had all we wanted there. We didn't want anything else. And we used to sort of wander up Gloucester Road about, sort of take us all the afternoon to have a cup of tea in Colmer's, and then wander up Gloucester Road looking in all the shops. And there was a big Woolworths there. We had to go in and poke around Woolworths and things like that. So, we didn't need to go into town. And we were a bit wary of going into town anyway because of all the bombing. So I don't think we ever really didn't go into town very much at all. I got a very, very vague early recollection of Wine Street. Well, I mean, that was totally different. You see it in all these sort of history things now, these pictures of Wine Street before the war and things like that. And there were a lot of shops and cinemas down there. And there was a news theatre. And I got a vague recollection of being taken down to Wine Street and then going into the news theatre. My mother used to take me in there sometimes. And they'd say 1 or 2 short comedy films and the newsreel. For about an hour, I think you could finish that. That would be in the news theatre. Of course, that was all bombed, during the war. And then it was after the war. I mean, they rebuilt it and they've altered it so many times that I wouldn't know my way around there now.
Yeah. I know you've lived in this house for quite some time now, but so you're not in Horfield as much, I suppose. But how has Horfield and the Common changed since you were young?
Horfield and the Common changed? Not a lot. The Common is always been as it is, and it has always been like it is because I'm not sure who owns it. I've probably got it down somewhere. But the Common itself, you're not supposed to put any building or anything on it. That row of houses over by, let me think, orientate myself. Opposite Tesco, there's a children's playground, isn't there? On the other side of Kellaway Avenue, there's a children's playground. Well, they weren't there then, the children's playground. But that row of houses, which is, there's the end one just by that playground, and it goes along to the shops. They were built in the 1930s, and that was the first row of houses that was built on the common for a long, long time. And I've got a picture in here somewhere of, what's it called? Horfield. Oh gosh, I can't remember what it's called now.
Castle?
Yeah, Horfield Castle, that's it. And that was on where that row of houses is. That's where Horfield Castle was built. And somebody built this back in the mid-Victorian era, and I can just remember it because it was pulled down before that row of houses was built. And the two by the gate, it had two absolutely enormous turrets. They built it right up, these sort of enormous turrets there, and I can just remember it and say that was Horfield Castle on the end there. And then when the where the sort of big care home is now up on the common, there used to be Horfield Lodge. There was a building there called Horfield Lodge, and Horfield Lodge was, well, I assume it was a private house, and then I can't remember when, the actual time, but it would have been after the war, because it was a private house for quite some long while, good time after the war, probably in the 60s, I think, I'm not sure. It was rebuilt and it became a care home for girls, a sort of corporation care home, and then the Methodist Church took it over, and it became the sort of hospital that it is now. But there's no extensive. The original sort of building and site is still there. It hasn't spread out across the common. Mm-hmm. It wasn't allowed to go to the common. And the other side, where Durham Close is, on the other side of the road, that was built just before the war, because my grandparents bought one of those houses. They moved up from St Andrews into Durham Close. They wanted a smaller house, so they came up and bought one of these new houses in Durham Close. And that was sort of just before about the late 1930s, 1939, something like that. And so it hasn't changed a lot, and the bits of common that are sort of in front at the top of West Broadway and all over the other side, they were all the same. And the field, which is the big field, which is at the back of the rectory and at the back of the church hall, I mean, that was always known as the rectory field. And a few years ago, not all that long ago, just a few years ago, there was an awful kerfuffle which was reported in the local paper that somebody wanted to buy some of that land and build something on there, and they said no way. So, you know, and I'm glad it's a nice free open space, but it's always so. Oh, and then as the common goes along, it goes along to Gloucester Road. Well, I didn't know that part very well, because Horfield Common to me was the little bit behind the rectory and where the down to the tennis courts there. That's a little bit that I knew well. But the other part, of course, it goes right along to Gloucester Road. Then it was about the mid-1800s that houses suddenly started to sprout up. I mean, the Bristol border was down by Stokes Croft there, and then suddenly houses started to sprout up. Zetland Road and coming up Gloucester Road. And the roads off the sides of Gloucester Road started about later 1800s, and I think Egerton Road and Berkeley Road were the first two roads, if you know those, do you? Just off Gloucester Road. Mm-hmm. They're the two roads, the first roads that were sort of built went off the main Gloucester Road. The main Gloucester Road was built up with shops and some of the houses, and if you look above the houses at some of the fascia boards up there, they're very interesting because they're very different, and they're quite interesting because they were all built to more or less to order, different things. And then the two first roads to go off Gloucester Road were Berkeley Road and Egerton Road. Mm-hmm. Then, as I say, it gradually crept up, and then I sort of later 1800s, the area of Horfield and St Paul's, I think, were sort of taken into Bristol, and the boundaries of Bristol were extended, and Filton was still in Gloucestershire, and the border, I remember there's a big notice board, there was a big notice board up there, long gone, just about the top of Monks Park Avenue, as you went up on the Gloucester Road, about the top of Monks Park Avenue, was a great big notice, you're now entering Gloucestershire, and that was where the border of Bristol and Gloucestershire was, at the top there. Of course now it's all, well, I don't know, I'm not sure now whether Filton is Bristol or South Gloucestershire, but but that's when the sort of big changeover came in, and all these buildings suddenly sort of mushroomed out, and the area of St Andrews was laid out then, the late 1800s, and the houses, and they're lovely houses all around there, and they were built there at that time, and St Andrews Park was laid out, because when they were doing, about that time, late 1800s, they became aware that a city as big as Bristol needed green spaces. So the downs were then preserved in perpetuity, and I think that's when the common was preserved as well, at about the same time. And you've got St Andrews, when they put the houses in St Andrews, they laid out St Andrews Park at the same time. And that's right, there was St Andrews, and then, as I say, the two roads off Gloucester Road were the first ones to go up, and then the shops came up, the further shops came up sort of Gloucester, and the roads went off at the side. As I said, I lived in Churchways Crescent, and those were about mid-1920s, and let's say it was sort of Edwardian houses at the bottom of the road, and the more modern ones at the top. And so that's it, sort of gradually thinned out. So we had, and of course there was a variety of shops down there. I must say it was the 1930s and we went to live down there much later, but at the same time there was this variety of shops, tremendous variety, that you didn't need to go into town for anything, and you have so many there, all different kinds. And Muller Road wasn't until 1920s, I don't think, and at the same time as Kellaway Avenue, the 1920s. I think Kellaway Avenue was named after the postmaster, Kellaway. I'm probably telling you lots of things you know already. But it was Kellaway Avenue and Muller Road was like the mid-1920s, and that was the sort of the ring road of the time, around.
Your class.